I was born of humble origins. It was only because my father risked his life to save the old Marquis that I was taken in and raised in the Marquis's manor. Outsiders all said that I would surely become the formal wife of the heir apparent in the future. When I had just turned 15, Xie Weiqing set 10 rules for me, stating bluntly that only if I fulfilled them would he marry me. These 10 rules were each more demanding than the last. I endured 5 long years before finally earning a word of passable from him. I secretly rejoiced, thinking he was finally willing to marry me into his family. How could I have known that on that day I would accidentally overhear him whispering to someone else?
This Cui Yu is clumsy, slow-witted, and stubborn by nature. She acts virtuous in front of others, yet behind their backs she even sneaks late night snacks. Being so double-faced shows she is extremely scheming. She always plays dumb and loves to calculate. Perhaps the marriage should be put on hold for now.
A late-night snack. Since dawn, I had been helping him host guests. I was exhausted the entire day, and my stomach was completely empty. It wasn't until midnight that I quietly drank half a bowl of plain congee. I reached out and touched my own gaunt face, and suddenly came to a realization. If I want to be Xie Weiqing's wife, I'm afraid I'd have to learn cultivation first. Forget it, never mind. I would rather remain an ordinary, worldly woman. I immediately wrote a letter to my maternal grandmother, begging her to send someone to fetch me. The letter contained only a few words. Grandmother, Yu is craving Taicang meat floss and braised duck. After the letter was sent out, I felt a great sense of relief all over. Thinking of the crispy, savory Taicang meat floss and the rich, flavorful soy sauce duck, my mouth watered instantly, making my empty stomach feel even hungrier. Just as I was wondering when grandmother would send someone to fetch me, the pearl curtain parted, and Cui, the maid who had gone to fetch breakfast, entered the room. Her hands were empty, and her face was filled with hesitation.
My lady,
She bit her lip and whispered in reply,
the heir said that you already had a late-night snack last night and your stomach is still digesting. Today you must go to the flower market in the south of the city to pick flowers for the old lady. The journey is long, and he fears you might not be able to hold your bladder, which would cause a scene. Therefore, you do not need to eat breakfast.
I lowered my head and touched my growling stomach. My emaciated fingertips pressed against my hollow lower abdomen. My bony knuckles looked like 5 withered branches. The bowl of porridge I drank last night had probably been digested completely long ago. I let out a sigh and instructed Cui, go to the street and buy me a sweet osmanthus cake or a begonia cake. Anything will do, as long as it fills my stomach. Cui agreed and turned to leave, only for a tall, upright figure at the doorway to block her path. Xie Weiqing had a cold expression. His black robe made him look as cold as ice and snow. His thin lips were slightly pursed, and his eyes were full of scrutiny.
You cannot go. You already drank half a bowl of porridge late last night. A young lady of noble birth should not indulge in the pleasures of food. If you are so greedy, how are you any different from the gossiping women in the streets? I thought that after 5 years in the Marquis's manor, you would have learned this rule by now.
5 years. Of course I knew this rule. Of the 10 iron rules he set, the very first one was to eat in moderation and not be greedy. I spent 5 years of my life starving myself from a girl who could eat 2 bowls of rice, into this ghostly state where a gust of wind could blow me over. Yesterday, Xie Weiqing hosted a banquet for his classmates and close friends. I was exhausted the entire day, from preparing the banquet in the early morning, to checking the ingredients at noon, and then personally receiving the guests in the evening, pouring wine, serving food, and exchanging pleasantries. I had to keep every single guest's preferences in mind. I was so busy my feet barely touched the ground, without even a drop of water. His friends raised their glasses in praise, complimenting my poise and propriety, and my flawless etiquette, saying I managed the banquet perfectly. Xie Weiqing also nodded then, offering a rare word of praise, saying it was decent. I actually felt secretly happy for a long while, just because of those 2 words. By the time everyone dispersed, it was already midnight. I was so hungry my head was spinning, and I really couldn't hold out any longer. So I went to the kitchen and asked for half a bowl of thin congee. It was cooked with nothing but plain water, without even a single piece of pickled vegetable to be seen, so watery that it reflected my face, accompanied by the dim candlelight, swallowing it down spoonful by spoonful. After finishing the porridge, I remembered that Xie Weiqing had drunk a lot of liquor on an empty stomach. He always drank too much when entertaining guests, and I was worried heartburn would keep him awake tonight. So I warmed up some sobering tea and brought it to the study myself. But just as I reached the door, I actually heard him chatting with a servant inside.
That Cui Yu, gentle and cultivated in front of others, yet she still sneaks half a bowl of rice porridge at midnight. It is better not to go through with this marriage.
Holding that bowl of hangover tea, I stood frozen outside the door, suddenly realizing that every single word and action in this courtyard was fully seen by him and kept in his heart. That matter about the half bowl of porridge. I clearly only said a single word about it to Mother Chen in the kitchen, yet it reached his ears the moment I turned around. I quietly left that bowl of hangover soup by the stone pillar outside the door, turned around, and slipped away. Thinking back on it now, my heart still aches faintly. My father was once a guard under the Marquis. Thanks to the Marquis's high regard and promotion, that he finally managed to gain some respectability. 5 years ago, the Marquis was ordered south to manage a flood. My father went with him. In the midst of the surging Yellow River, the two of them unfortunately fell into the water together. My father used the very last of his strength to push the Marquis up to a crooked, dead tree on the water's surface, but he himself was swallowed by the flood. Even his body was never recovered. The Marquis was fortunate enough to survive, and the very first thing he did upon returning to the capital was bring me into his manor, settling me in the finest guest room of the inner chambers. He stroked my face and said,
"Hey, you. From now on, this is your home."
The old madam also treated me wonderfully. She personally helped me settle in and made dresses for me, fearing I would feel too constrained. She comforted me.
Good girl, don't worry. Your father was a man of honor. What the Marquis's manor owes him can never be fully repaid in this lifetime.
From then on, I settled down there. The Marquis's manor treated me as an adopted daughter in name, but in truth, they treated me with the respect due to a noble young lady in every way. My daily allowance was no different from Xie Weiqing's. During festivals and holidays, the old madam would take me to banquets, praising me to everyone for being well-educated and sensible. As time went on, everyone in the capital came to understand that the girl in the Marquis's manor wants to be the heir's consort in the future. On the day I came of age, Xie Weiqing actually looked me in the eye for once.
Cui Yu, do you want to be my official wife?
I gripped the hem of my clothes tightly and nodded vigorously.
Fair enough.
He pulled out a stack of papers and spread them out before my eyes.
I have 10 rules here. If you can abide by them, only then will I marry you.
I lowered my head to look. I had to master double-sided embroidery, weaving mandarin ducks playing in the water, so they looked lifelike. On the zither, I had to play high mountains and flowing water, making every note pleasing to the ear. At chess, I had to play 3 consecutive games with him without resigning. My tiny, formal calligraphy had to be sharp and powerful, forming a style of my own. Furthermore, there were the rules of women's virtues and household regulations, every single word of which had to be memorized backward and forward, and engraved deeply in my heart. Women's virtue, speech, appearance, and work. Not a single one could be lacking. Even the stories in historical records and biographies had to be memorized by heart, using the past to understand the present, and to restrain my own behavior. I looked down the list, item by item, my fingers slowly growing numb. These 10 rules were each incredibly demanding, as if he were deliberately finding fault. But when I raised my face and met his cold eyes, my heart suddenly skipped a beat. As if possessed, I agreed. Fine, I will practice. He raised an eyebrow slightly, seeming a bit surprised. He immediately gave a brief grunt of approval, stood up, and left. Only later did I realize that these 10 rules were just the beginning. Every year, on a sudden whim, he would add a few more. One year he added, no eating while hosting guests. The next year he added, must wake up and dress half an hour earlier than him. But back then, blinded by his handsome appearance, I actually thought it was all worth it. Falling for Xie Weiqing was indeed an extremely easy thing to do. He was handsome, from a wealthy family, and highly educated. From head to toe, not a single flaw could be found. Of all the young ladies in the capital, 8 out of 10 secretly adored him. For a servant girl like me, penniless, to have the good fortune of being matched with him was a blessing others could only dream of. And so, over the course of 5 years, I went from a country girl who didn't even know how to embroider, to learning how to weave double-sided mandarin ducks, play high mountains and flowing water on the zither, play 3 games of chess without losing, write beautiful calligraphy, compose poetry on the spot, and become the accomplished Lady Cui who could taste 100 teas. Others praised the Marquis's manor for raising such a talented lady. But now, I no longer want to be that talented lady. Heir Apparent. I was never anyone of importance in the Marquis's manor to begin with. I am merely a maid kept in the courtyard, because of my late father's favor in shielding your family from disaster. Yesterday, I worked hard the entire day, without a single drop of water. In the middle of the night, I was so hungry, I truly couldn't bear it anymore. So I went to the kitchen to ask for half a bowl of gruel. Is the Marquis's manor really so petty as to begrudge me half a bowl of gruel? Xie Weiqing's expression remained unchanged. He only said coldly,
Cui Yu, one of the 10 rules states very clearly, when hosting guests, the primary wife must lead by example and refrain from eating at the table to show proper decorum.
But I am not the primary wife. Have you forgotten, Heir Apparent? I don't even qualify as your prospective bride. I am nothing more than an outsider living in the Marquis's manor. That is all. His face darkened.
Cui Yu, with this attitude of yours, I'm afraid we must add another rule. Never disobey your husband's orders. Have you completely forgotten your upbringing and decorum?
Husband? When did the two of us get married? I didn't look at him again. Turning my head, I called out, Cui, go and get me another bowl of tofu pudding. No, make it 2 bowls. I want both the sweet and the savory ones. Cui gave an acknowledging reply and ran out. Xie Weiqing's expression grew even more unsightly.
A lady of a noble house. Who eats this much first thing in the morning?
Unwilling to back down, I blurted out, the day before yesterday the heir himself was eating meat and drinking soup first thing in the morning. Speaking of rules, were you not also indulging in the pleasures of the palate? The moment the words left my mouth, I startled myself. In the 5 years since I entered the manor, I had never spoken back to him like this. He too was clearly taken aback. He stared at me for a long while, a flicker of anger rising in his eyes. Flicking his sleeve, he said coldly,
Utterly obstinate. I think we had better put this marriage on hold.
Looking at his rigid, upright figure, I suddenly spoke up. Here. Xie Weiqing's steps paused slightly, but he did not turn around. When did you and I ever have a marriage agreement? The surroundings fell into a dead silence. His figure froze in place. He waited for a while before taking another step forward.
Cui Yu, do not come crying to me to apologize later.
I let out a laugh. Never. Having eaten a massive amount in one go first thing in the morning, I patted my slightly bloated belly and let out a satisfied burp. For the first time in 5 years, I had eaten with such reckless abandon. I was indeed full, yet that sense of fullness actually made my nose tingle with a hint of sorrow. So filling one's stomach was such a joyful thing. I had always been a lover of food. When I was a child in Taicang, my grandmother always said I was born into the wrong life and should have been born by the side of the kitchen god. The shuangfeng mutton noodles from the street, the honeyed lotus root by the river, the duck stewing in my grandmother's pot. Which of them was not a delicacy of the mortal world? Being fond of food is human nature, but Xie Weiqing chose to view it as a disgrace. What an oddball. Does he not eat at all? Living on the elements day in and day out, surviving on air and mist, as if untouched by the dust of the mortal world. Such strict discipline could probably only please a goddess, and it would have to be the kind of goddess who doesn't eat grains, doesn't touch cooking oil, and doesn't even need to drink dew. I shook my head, stood up, and walked over to the dressing table. From the very bottom of the cabinet, I pulled out that stack of papers. On them was his handwriting, stroke by stroke, neat and beautiful, filled with rules I couldn't memorize in half a lifetime. I swept my eyes over them briefly, grabbed the fire piston, blew on it gently, and burned them all to ashes. In the afternoon, I went to the flower market in the south of the city to help the old lady bring back the orchids she had ordered. Holding the flower pot, I entered the old lady's room, where she was napping on the bed by the window. Seeing me come in, she smiled and waved.
Yu, you're here. Come, sit down.
I placed the orchids on the flower stand and sat down beside her. Old lady, I am leaving. I have sent a letter to my grandmother, and she will probably send someone to take me back home right away. The old lady froze for a moment.
Then what about Weiqing? Does he know? Did he have another falling out with you?
I shook my head and remained silent. She looked at my face, saw through everything, and let out a heavy sigh.
Yu, listen to me. Those awful rules he set for you are simply too ridiculous. What do you mean? No eating at the dining table? And what is this about having to master double-sided embroidery? Our Marquis's household has no such ridiculous rules. You don't have to pay any attention to them at all.
I understand. She had advised me more than once. During the first year, in order to practice double-sided embroidery, my hands were covered in needle wounds, she said with heartache.
Yu, stop practicing. The Marquis's estate doesn't care about this.
But back then, my mind and eyes were filled with nothing but Xie Weiqing. I thought that as long as I could meet all the rules he set, he would spare me a second glance, and he would want me. I was possessed by my own obsession. I couldn't blame anyone else. Now, after suffering for 5 years, I have finally woken up. My lady. I looked at her seriously. Once I return to Taicang, I will send you a set of mahjong. The old lady was surprised.
Mahjong? What is that?
Yes, I smiled, my eyes curving with joy. My late mother used to be a master at the gaming table. She was undefeated in that alley of Taicang. She passed all her skills down to me. When I send the mahjong to you, I will write down the rules word for word and send them to you. A hint of pride showed on my face. Once you have practiced enough and got the hang of it, you can utterly defeat the old Marquis and the others during the holidays. The old lady was amused by me and burst into laughter.
Really?
Really. Her gaze was incredibly gentle.
Fair enough. If there is a chance, I will also go to Taicang to visit you. I heard that Taicang is also the place where the cowherd and the weaver girl descended to earth.
Yes, it is. I nodded. On the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, it is much more bustling there than anywhere else. When the time comes, I will take you to see the lanterns, to eat pastries, and to see the grand spectacle of the double 7th festival. Taicang is where the true bustling life of the common people is. Strangely enough, after only a few days, my complexion had grown much rosier. In the bronze mirror, the girl with slightly fuller cheeks and bright, sparkling eyes actually looked a bit unfamiliar to me. When strolling down the street, I no longer gasped for breath after a few steps as I used to. Today was the Dragon Boat Festival. Ever since our little disagreement that day, Xie Weiqing seemed to have been waiting for me to bow my head and apologize. During past festivals, he would always arrange for me to host a banquet early on, leaving me so exhausted that my feet barely touched the ground. This year, by a stroke of luck, he did not say a word, and went out to stroll the streets early in the morning. I too enjoyed a rare moment of leisure. Changing into a lightweight, short-sleeved outfit, I took a few taels of loose silver and headed toward the riverbank with Cui. The Dragon Boat Festival in the imperial capital was incredibly bustling. Red silk hung all along the tea houses and taverns lining the river. Amidst the lively atmosphere of the marketplace, the scents of mugwort and calamus mingled, wafting over me. Children holding colorful rice dumplings tied with 5 colored threads ran laughingly across the gray stone slabs. As I was watching in fascination, I suddenly heard a burst of drums and gongs. Looking up, I saw it was actually a group of fellow townsfolk from Taicang performing a dragon and lion dance. I squeezed into the crowd, clapping and cheering, shouting until my throat was nearly hoarse. Swept up in the excitement, I stepped closer, pulled out a few pieces of loose silver, and handed them to the troop leader to strike up a conversation. "Excuse me, brother. Could you let me have a go at it too?" The troop leader sized me up carefully, his face full of curiosity.
You know how to do this, young lady?
I loved watching it when I was little, so I practiced for a few years. It has just been so long since I last played. I don't know if I've gotten rusty. When I was little, back in Taicang, there was an old master lion dancer in the forest, seeing me follow him around every day. He taught me a few moves. Back then, I was light on my feet, so bold that they'd tear the roof off, even wilder than the boys. The troop leader hesitated for a moment and handed the lion head over. I took it and pulled it over my head. Took a deep breath. And as the gongs and drums started up again, I performed the lion playing with the ball routine to my heart's content. A burst of cheers erupted from the crowd around us. Copper coins clinked into the tray, piling up until it was completely full. My entire body warmed up. So I simply tossed the lion head aside, dropped into a horse stance, and performed a set of white ape through the back boxing right then and there. Once I finished, Cui was stomping her feet in anxiety nearby.
My lady, what kind of madness has possessed you? What if someone sees you?
So what if they do? I took the towel she handed me and casually wiped away the sweat. Right at that moment, I glanced over carelessly and spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Xie Weiqing stood about 3 feet away, his face already pale with anger. He was accompanied by 2 or 3 of his fair-weather friends, as well as Wu Xianhao, the 3rd daughter of the duke's estate, pampered and spoiled since childhood. She was arrogant and vibrant. She never hid her affection for Xie Weiqing and loved to cling to him. Everyone in the capital knew this, and she cared even less about what others said. At this moment, Wu Xianhao was staring at me with wide eyes. Only after a long while did she sputter out,
Young Master Xie, isn't that Lady Cui from your courtyard? Doesn't she usually value etiquette the most? How can she mingle in the streets like this? Both lion dancing and boxing.
"She is really." I waited for her to spit out some nasty words.
That was so awesome.
She pulled 2 banknotes out of her pocket and slapped them into my palm, her eyes full of admiration.
Lady Cui, here is 100 taels. Will you take me with you?
I wiped away my sweat and said with a smile, "Thank you, Lady Wu." Before my voice could fade, Xie Weiqing's voice came over.
Cui Yu, what are you doing here?
"Didn't you see Heir Apparent?"
I saw it.
A chilling aura swirled all over him, and the veins on his forehead were faintly bulging.
You are simply behaving without any sense of propriety.
"Since you saw it, why do you still ask Heir Apparent?" I gave a soft laugh. "I almost thought you had gone blind." The crowd fell dead silent for a second. Xie Weiqing's group of fair-weather friends looked at each other, their eyes filled with utter disbelief. After all, in their memory, I was always that gentle, obedient, and highly educated Cui Yu. How could I, in broad daylight, be jumping around wearing a lion head, and even throw punches and argue with the heir apparent on the street? Cui stood behind me, her face turning pale with fright, but I only felt a sense of sheer satisfaction. Xie Weiqing glared at me and ordered in a deep voice,
Cui Yu, return to the manor and write a 1,000-word confession. Otherwise, I will.
"Otherwise what?" In the past, his best trick was to put our marriage on hold, saying it would be discussed later. He had me completely under his thumb, but now, I didn't care anymore. Besides, there was never an official betrothal between us anyway. For someone who didn't even qualify as a prospective wife, what was there to postpone? Was I had submitted no fewer than 100,000-word confessions before. Every single time I had to be perfectly proper, with every word showing utmost sincerity. He would take it and mark it up with a red brush. Once he finished correcting it, he would make me stand before him and recite it back to him, word for word. Every time that happened, I would hang my head, my voice trembling, wishing I could just bury my face in my lap. Looking back now, he didn't seem like a young master at all, but rather a scolding schoolmaster, and the most nitpicking, unreasonable kind at that. I didn't bother to argue further, grabbing Cui and slipping away.
My lady,
Cui Yu stumbled as I dragged her along.
The prince is still back there.
Let him wait. I didn't even look back. Today is the Dragon Boat Festival, and I haven't had my fill of fun yet. The gaze burning into my back felt as if it were going to pierce right through me. We wandered the market for another 2 hours, munching on rice dumplings, buying fragrant sachets, and watching street performances. It wasn't until the sun began to set that we happily made our way back. Just as we approached the main gate of the Marquis's manor, we ran right into a tall figure. His face was handsome and gentle, with a faint resemblance to how he looked years ago. My cousin, Shen Boyuan, was much taller than before, and a bit thinner too, but those eyes of his were just the same, shining with a gentle warmth when he looked at me. I froze in surprise.
Yu.
We hadn't seen each other in a very long time. I had heard he was taking the imperial examinations this year and was studying hard in seclusion. I never expected him to come all this way just to meet me. Cousin, what are you doing here? Shen Boyuan looked me up and down, his brow slowly furrowing.
Yu, how did you lose so much weight?
I didn't dare tell him the truth. I suppose I'm just not used to the climate here. He didn't call me out on it. Instead, he reached out and gently ruffled my hair. When we were children in Taicang, I used to follow him everywhere. When I got tired from playing, I would collapse on the ground and refuse to budge. He would stroke my face just like this, and then bend down to carry me on his back.
No matter. Once you're back in Taicang, you'll gain the weight back. I'll have grandmother brew bone broth for you every day. That will surely nurse you back to health.
A sudden wave of sorrow rushed to my nose. I blinked hard, forcing back the tears. Shen Boyuan looked at me, as if hesitating to speak.
I thought you and the heir were destined for each other.
I shook my head and remained silent.
Since it wasn't meant to be. Once we return, I'll have grandmother find you a good husband. We don't need a prominent family, nor do you have to follow any of those ridiculous rules. In the future, once I pass the imperial exams, I will protect you.
When he said those words, I believed him without a single doubt. From childhood to adulthood, he had never let me down. I lowered my head and gave a heavy nod of agreement. The two of us chatted as we absent-mindedly stepped into the Marquis's manor. The candles in the corridor burned dimly. A figure stood in the main hall. It was Xie Weiqing. There was no telling how long he had been waiting at the entrance. Seeing us walking side by side, his face flared with anger.
Cui Yu. House rule number 7. No private meetings or interactions with unrelated men. Violators shall be deemed wanton. Rule number 10. You must return to the courtyard before dark every day. Violators shall be deemed willful and unruly. You have made mistake after mistake, breaking all the rules in a single afternoon.
Xie Weiqing clenched his teeth, his eyes as deep as an abyss.
Go kneel down. Take your lashing.
Shen Boyuan furrowed his brows, his voice laced with disbelief.
What lashing? Why should she be punished? Where did these rules come from?
My heart ached, staring straight at Xie Weiqing's livid face. I blurted out in a shout, I won't take the punishment. What right do you have to hit me? Xie Weiqing's pupils dilated slightly, mustering up all my courage. I yelled back at him in one breath. Weren't you also talking and laughing with Miss Wu? What? When the heir flirts with others, it is considered romantic. But when I chat with my brother, it is considered consorting with an outsider. His face flushed red and then turned pale. After a long pause, he suddenly turned around and roared at the servant behind him.
Go. Bring the paddle.
The servant trembled in fear and scrambled away. By the time he brought the paddle, Xie Weiqing's attitude brooked no argument.
Hand.
Shen Boyuan stepped in front of me, shielding me behind his back. He was of equal stature to Xie Weiqing, standing tall and straight. A rare trace of anger appeared in his gentle eyes.
Here, which rule did Yu break for you to treat her so harshly? Could it be that during her 5 years in your manor, you have always treated her this way?
Xie Weiqing did not answer. Shen Boyuan turned his face to look at me. In that look, there was heartache and regret.
Yu is lively by nature. Back in our hometown, she was cheerful and mischievous, always talking and laughing. I have always wondered, why is she so wooden now? It is all because of you.
Xie Weiqing's face had long since become far worse than merely embarrassed. His gaze swept past Shen Boyuan, carrying an unshielded coldness and scrutiny.
She did it willingly. What does it have to do with you?
I never would have expected that my past willingness would make me seem as cheap as dirt in his eyes. I thought sincerity would be met with sincerity, but I never expected this. I shoved Shen Boyuan aside, reached out, and snatched the wooden paddle from the servant's hand. 5 years. How many times had this thing struck me? Every single time, with his casual command to reach out, I would obediently open my palm, grit my teeth, and take the beating without a single word. Today, I refused to endure it any longer. Raising the paddle, before he could even react, I struck the back of Xie Weiqing's hand. He stood there, frozen in shock. The surroundings fell dead silent. Since the heir loves beating people so much, why not lead by example first? Xie Weiqing lowered his head, staring at the back of his hand, which was bright red and slowly swelling up. His eyes widened, as if seeing through me for the very first time.
Cui Yu, you are insolent.
I threw the wooden paddle onto the ground. Here. How many times have you beaten me? You can't even take a single strike from me. I am going to be insolent tonight. What can you possibly do to me? Just try touching me again. I will go complain to the Marquis and the Madam. The Marquis and the Madam never knew that he also liked to discipline me with a wooden plank. I turned around, tugged at the corner of Shen Boyuan's sleeve, and said, "Cousin, ignore him. I will take you to see the old Marquis and Madam." Shen Boyuan looked down at me. Without saying much, he only gave a soft grunt of assent, letting me pull him along as we walked out. From behind us came the sound of some object being kicked hard. Ha, he is kicking the door, is he? Serves him right if it hurts. I didn't look back. The main hall was brightly lit. The Marquis sat high in the seat of honor. After listening to Shen Boyuan's words, he fell into deep thought for a long time.
Years ago, I promised your adoptive father that I would take good care of you. I originally planned that you and Weiqing would share a blessed union, bringing our two families even closer, so that I could set my mind at ease.
He let out a sigh and shook his head.
But I did not expect that our fate was simply too shallow after all.
I sighed in my heart. In this estate, except for Xie Weiqing, everyone else is wonderful. Your lordship's kindness to me is as heavy as a mountain, and the heir has also treated me like an elder brother. It is my own bitter fate that I am not worthy of such high status. The rumors have already delayed the heir for 5 years, and I have always felt guilty about it. Returning to my hometown early now will also prevent any further damage to his reputation. These words were spoken beautifully and tactfully, so much so that even I almost believed them. The old madam sat nearby, the corners of her eyes red.
You, since you do not have the fortune to be my good daughter-in-law, being my adopted daughter is also very good. When do you plan to set out?
Tomorrow. My maternal grandmother is advanced in years, and I hope to return home as soon as possible to fulfill my filial duties. She did not try hard to make me stay, but merely ordered her servants to prepare a heap of generous gifts for me. I stood up and bowed. I turned around and walked out. The moment I stepped over the threshold, out of the corner of my eye, I suddenly caught sight of a dark figure. I didn't know how long Xie Weiqing had been waiting there. Half of his face was hidden in the shadows, while the other half was illuminated by the candlelight, making his expression hard to read. It only seemed as though he was somewhat dazed. The moment this thought crossed my mind, I immediately suppressed it. I must have seen wrong. A man like Xie Weiqing never showed his true feelings. Whether it is anger or sarcasm, it is always suppressed beneath that mask of aloofness. How could he possibly be dazed?
Are you slipping away?
I stopped in my tracks, turned my face, and gave him a slight nod. I have been a trouble to you during this time, heir. Then, I walked right past him. With the host's greeting, Shen Boyuan moved into the guest room, returning to my own room alone. I felt that I had never wished to return to Taicang more than at this very moment. The next day, the heavens showed no mercy, and rain began to patter down. Shen Boyuan held a patterned cloth umbrella, ordering the servants to carry the last chest into the carriage. I waited by his side, the hem of my skirt soaked by the rain, yet my heart felt incredibly light and free. Just at that moment, footsteps sounded from behind me. Turning around to look, it was Xie Weiqing. He was holding a white paper umbrella, with what looked like a dark bruise near the corner of his eye. His expression remained cold, showing no sign of emotion. I didn't know when the old lady had come out, but she was standing by the door pillar, smiling at me with affection.
You. The road is not safe. There were bandits in that area a while ago. For a young woman like you, I really cannot rest easy. I've asked Weiqing to escort you to Taicang. With him protecting you, it will be safer.
I was about to refuse, but the words on the tip of my tongue were swallowed back down. It wouldn't do to reject the old lady's kindness to her face. Not to mention, looking at Xie Weiqing, he probably wasn't willing either. Anyway, it was nothing more than putting on a show. Once we left their territory, we would go our separate ways. So it was no big deal. Xie Weiqing didn't even look at me. With a tense, stern face, he closed his umbrella and bent down to climb into the carriage. Lifting the curtain halfway, he turned his face, his tone stiff and cold.
Get in.
Clutching the hem of my dress, I got into the carriage, then turned to wave at Shen Boyuan. Cousin, you come along too. Shen Boyuan glanced at Xie Weiqing and did not refuse. He closed his umbrella and naturally sat down right next to me. The curtain fell, and the carriage began to sway as it started moving. The carriage was extremely narrow, making it a bit cramped with 3 people squeezed inside. Xie Weiqing sat directly opposite me, his back straight as a board, his gaze fixed on the window curtain, though it was unclear what he was looking at. Shen Boyuan sat on my left, behaving himself quietly, occasionally turning his head to steal a glance at me. The wind howled, the wheels rumbled, and the atmosphere was rather awkward. Shen Boyuan probably saw through my discomfort, As he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brown paper package, he tore it open, revealing several pure white sweet cakes inside, which were still radiating a hint of warmth.
Hey you, we left in such a rush this morning, and you barely ate any breakfast. Have some of this to tide you over.
It was osmanthus pastry, the very thing I craved most when I was a child. Just as I was about to reach out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Xie Weiqing sitting opposite me. At some point, his hand had also slipped into his pocket and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. Seeing Shen Boyuan's actions, his hand suddenly froze, then slowly retracted, stuffing the paper package back deep inside. I pretended not to notice, and from the brown paper Shen Boyuan handed over, I pinched a piece of the sweet cake. Taking a bite, the delicate fragrance of osmanthus spread in my mouth, soft, chewy, and sweet. Thank you, cousin. You have some too. I pinched a piece and held it in front of Shen Boyuan. He was taken aback for a moment. He took the sweet pastry, bowed his head, and took a bite. As the two of us were eating, talking, and laughing, Xie Weiqing, sitting opposite, did not move at all, his eyes fixed on the sweet cake in my hand, then drifted away, and then fixed back on it again. In those eyes, which were always cold and indifferent, there was actually a hint of jealousy. Soon, there was only one last piece left inside the brown paper. I reached my hand over, and just as my fingertips touched the edge of the sweet cake, a dry cough drifted over from the opposite side. I looked up at Xie Weiqing. His gaze was averted to the side, staring at the rain outside the curtain, yet the tips of his ears secretly flushed a dark red. I saw right through him. Your lordship, have you eaten?
I haven't this morning either.
Never mind, I'm talking nonsense. I swiftly cut him off, pinched that last piece of pastry, and stuffed it cleanly and quickly into my own mouth, mumbling indistinctly. A divine and ethereal figure like your lordship has always lived on wind and dew, untouched by the dust of the mortal world. I suppose you would disdain eating such vulgar sweets. The carriage fell into a dead silence for a second. Xie Weiqing's face opposite me was as black as charcoal. Along the way, Shen Boyuan, probably worried I would get too tired, would stop whenever we encountered a market and pick out whatever delicious food he saw. Sugar-roasted chestnuts, sweet lotus root and honey, salted plums, and juju paste pastries. All sorts of things piled up in half the carriage. He bought 2 portions of everything. One portion was for me, and the other was to eat on the road. But he just didn't bring a portion for Xie Weiqing. Shen Boyuan didn't offer him any, and I didn't say anything either. So he just sat opposite us with a dark face, watching us eat, without uttering a single word. At first, I found it quite satisfying, but gradually, I realized that a person's face could actually look so incredibly sour. From morning till dusk, changing from clear skies to a thunderstorm, the chill between his brows grew deeper and deeper, so cold that both of us wondered if it was about to snow. As we were about to enter the territory of Taicang, I lifted the window curtain and looked at the familiar farmland outside. My heart felt a sense of relief. Turning back to Xie Weiqing, I said, "It is fine for the heir to escort us up to this point. Taicang is just ahead. The two of us can enter the city on our own." His gaze swept across my face, his expression showing no emotion.
I will escort you into Taicang's territory before I leave.
No need, we are already very close.
My mother charged me with escorting you through the gates. As of now, you have not entered the gates yet.
I opened my mouth, then glanced at Shen Boyuan. He shook his head gently, meaning, just let him be. I had no choice but to let him have his way. The carriage continued forward, leaning against the carriage wall. I was just pondering what to order for my first meal back at the manor, when suddenly, the sound of fighting drifted over from ahead.
Oh no.
Shen Boyuan's expression changed instantly, and he raised his hand to shield me behind him.
It is bandits.
The window curtain was suddenly yanked open. The guard captain said, in a panic,
Your lordship, there are about 20 or 30 fierce bandits ahead, charging this way aggressively.
Xie Weiqing's expression instantly turned icy cold. He lifted the window curtain to scan the surroundings, then turned to me and threw down a sentence.
Hide inside the carriage and don't move.
Then drawing his sword, he leapt out of the carriage. Outside, a chaotic battle instantly broke out. The soldiers we brought were skilled, after all, but the bandits were numerous and powerful, and they had ambushed us from the tall grass, so we gradually began to lose ground. To make matters worse, some of the bandits actually had crossbows. A stray arrow pierced through the air and struck the carriage frame. Moments later, several more arrows flew in, riddling the carriage with holes. The horses panicked, and the carriage jolted violently. I was thrown completely off balance and slammed against the doorframe, leaving me dizzy and disoriented.
Quick, run.
Shen Boyuan grabbed my hand and pulled me as he leapt down from the carriage. The moment my feet touched the ground, before we could even take a few steps, a long blade came slashing toward us. My mind went completely blank, and I had no time to dodge. 2 dark figures rushed forward almost at the same time, but Xie Weiqing was closer to me. He shielded me completely against his chest, taking the slash with his back. My mind went numb for a second. I had finally managed to sever our ties. I couldn't afford to owe him again. Xie Weiqing let out a muffled groan, turned his head, and firmly blocked the path in front of me. Fortunately, the county magistrate arrived swiftly with his officers, instantly breaking through the bandits' ranks and sending them fleeing in all directions. Xie Weiqing was rushed to the nearest apothecary. The physician tore open his robe, revealing a long, bloody gash across his back. The old physician knitted his brows, wiping away the blood, while sighing.
The wound is extremely severe. I'm afraid he must rest for some time. How is there also poison on this blade? If things go badly, it might shorten his lifespan.
When he was being stitched up, he had already passed out. I watched over him by the bedside, staring at his deathly pale face, my heart filled with the tangle of emotions. In the middle of the night, he ran a high fever, tossing and turning in his delirium, the veins on his forehead bulging slightly. Sometimes he would mumble a few words, unintelligible.
You. I was wrong.
This man, is he still lecturing me in his dreams? Xie Weiqing slept deeply for 2 days and 2 nights. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to run away. It wasn't that I felt sorry for him, but he did take a blade for me. If I were to just slip away like this, it would really be too ungrateful. By the 3rd day, his fever finally subsided. Shen Boyuan and I went to check on him as courtesy demanded, and by chance my eyes met his half-open gaze. Xie Weiqing's face was deathly pale, but his eyes were filled with joy.
You. I am glad you are unharmed.
I was stunned. You? When had he ever called me that? I wondered if I had misheard. Or maybe he had lost his mind from the fever and wasn't fully awake yet. Heir Apparent, I have already sent someone to deliver a message to your residence. Your body is no longer in any grave danger. It is just that the toxin hasn't been fully cleared yet. You can just wait here for the people from your estate to pick you up. My cousin and I are heading back to our hometown first. After saying this, I prepared to leave. He suddenly sat straight up, the movement pulling at the knife wound on his back. He gasped sharply from the pain.
I will escort you back.
I frowned slightly. No need. He did not argue further, but stubbornly pulled back the covers and got out of bed. Startled, Cui rushed to support him, but he gently pushed her away. I glanced at Shen Boyuan. He let out a heavy, long sigh. There was no reasoning with him at all. And just like that, Xie Weiqing insisted on tagging along with us, escorting us all the way to grandmother's house in Taicang. Grandmother was waiting outside the gate, leaning on her cane. When she saw me step down from the carriage, the old lady's eyes welled with tears instantly. With trembling hands, she pulled me tightly into her embrace.
You, my darling, how did you get so thin?
She gently pinched my cheeks, tears of heartache nearly spilling over.
You've lost so much weight. There is barely any flesh left on your face. My precious child, how much did you suffer out there?
My nose tingled, and I could barely hold back my own tears. As we were speaking, a mouth-watering savory aroma drifted from the courtyard. It was the scent of mutton, rich and savory, mingled with the fragrance of garlic and ginger, forcing its way into my nose. Grandmother pulled me by the hand as we walked inside.
Knowing you were returning today, I had them start simmering the broth early this morning. Our shuangfeng mutton noodles. You won't find this flavor anywhere else.
Hearing this made my mouth water. That was the very dish I had craved most as a child. The broth was as milky white as frost, the mutton tender and juicy, and the thin noodles springy and smooth, topped with a handful of chopped cilantro, and drizzle a spoonful of bright red chili oil. Just thinking about it made my stomach growl with hunger. Only then did the old lady notice a man still standing behind me. She looked towards Xie Weiqing, sizing him up carefully. Seeing that although his expression was bleak, he still carried himself with elegant grace, she politely invited him.
Young master, you must be exhausted from the journey. Come inside and have a bowl of noodles with us.
My heart skipped a beat in panic. My grandmother came from a merchant family. My grandfather had made his fortune trading silk in his early years, eventually building up this modest estate. While not fabulously wealthy, they were well off. But in Xie Weiqing's eyes, merchants were of the lowest class. Consequently, the dining etiquette and customs of merchant households were things he utterly despised. He had once remarked back at the Marquis's manor that the merchant class, obsessed only with money, could never present themselves at a proper banquet. I had suffered silently over those words for a long time, fearing he might say something hurtful now. I quickly cut in to head him off. No need. The heir has other business to attend to.
All right.
What did he just say? I turned my head, looking at Xie Weiqing in disbelief. He nodded slightly and said respectfully,
Thank you for your hospitality.
Didn't he find the smell of mutton absolutely revolting? During my 5 years at the Marquis's manor, whenever the kitchen prepared mutton, he wouldn't even touch his spoon. Once I had specially made a dish of stir-fried lamb offal with scallions. Just to please him, he took only a single glance, complained that the gamey smell was too strong, and ordered someone to take it away. How is it that he is fine with it today? During the meal, He picked up his chopsticks and took a bite of the mutton noodles. His hand paused slightly. I thought he was about to throw down his chopsticks. In my heart, I had already prepared the words. If you're not used to it, then don't eat it. Yet, he only hesitated for a mere second before swallowing it down, spoonful by spoonful. Slowly and methodically, he finished every last bit. I stared at him intently for a long while, feeling that something was definitely off. After the meal, grandmother held my hand and quietly inquired,
You. Who is that young master?
After a moment's hesitation, I decided to tell her the truth. Grandmother, he is Xie Weiqing, the heir of the Marquis. Grandmother looked slightly surprised and nodded repeatedly.
Oh my, so he is the young lord. He is truly handsome, even more so than the men described in storybooks. Since he has come all this way, we must have him stay for a few days and treat him well.
I quickly advised her in a low voice. Grandmother, he is the heir. He has been pampered since childhood. He won't be able to get used to our place. I put it politely. But in truth, it wasn't just a matter of him not being used to it. With all the rules and standards he set at the Marquis's manor, every single one of them looked down upon commoners. Asking him to stay here now would probably be more agonizing for him than execution. Grandmother gave me a stern look.
He escorted you all this way, and even got injured. How could we possibly chase him away immediately?
Before I could say anything more, a cold male voice drifted from behind us.
All right.
I turned around. Xie Weiqing had stood under the veranda at some unknown point.
I shall trouble you then, grandmother.
Grandmother. He actually called her grandmother. I stared at him with wide eyes, wondering if there was something wrong with her hearing. Did he not know the old lady was a merchant? But Xie Weiqing's expression was calm, showing no awkwardness at all. It was as if he had completely discarded his principles the moment he entered Taicang. Over the next 2 weeks or so, despite his injuries, he kept begging me every day to take him out for a stroll, claiming he had never been to Taicang before and is unfamiliar with the area. I told him there were plenty of servants in the courtyard and that he could just have one of them accompany him. But the old lady said,
You stayed at the Marquis's manor for so long. Now that he has come to our place, we ought to return the favor.
She was getting on in years, and I didn't want to upset her, so I had no choice but to agree. However, I was cautious, and made sure to bring Shen Boyuan along every time. With the 3 of us together, at least it wouldn't feel so awkward. We went to hear the legend of Emperor Jianwen's escape at the floating bridge, which claimed that during the Jingnan campaign, Emperor Jianwen fled the imperial city and hid beneath this very bridge. The bridge was quite small, with green moss growing thick in the crevices of the blue bricks. Shen Boyuan walked ahead, turning back to look at me from time to time and reaching out to give me a hand. Xie Weiqing, walking on my right, also offered his hand, but I didn't take it. We also visited the cowherd and weaver girl temple, as Taicang was said to be the place where they first met. The temple was tiny, and the old banyan tree was covered in red ribbons. Whenever the wind blew, they would sway back and forth. Pointing at the tree, I said, when I was young, I would come here every Qixi festival to tie a red ribbon, praying to the weaver girl to bless me with clever hands. Xie Weiqing looked me up and down, various complicated emotions flickering in his eyes. During that time, I constantly felt as though there was a gaze silently fixed upon my back. But when I turned to look, Xie Weiqing would avert his gaze, staring into the distance, with a perfectly calm look on his face. Shen Boyuan, on the other hand, would always quietly take half a step forward, blocking the space right between us. I pretended not to notice anything. As the days slipped by, the Qixi festival drew closer and closer. The personal attendants sent by the Marquis's manor to escort him back had arrived long ago. They had been staying at the inn for many days, hoping Xie Weiqing would return to the capital. But since Xie Weiqing didn't mention leaving, they didn't dare to urge him. On this day, a rare guest arrived at the manor. It was Wu Xianhao. He made quite a fuss the moment he entered, claiming he had come to urge Xie Weiqing to return to the capital and to drop by Taicang while I'm at it, to see this legendary land where the cowherd and the weaver girl fell in love. I saw his carriage parked outside the gate, with 2 maidservants following behind him, carrying bags big and small. It was obvious he intended to overstay his welcome. Hearing the commotion, Xie Weiqing came out to greet him. Upon seeing Wu Xianhao, he instinctively looked over at me. In his eyes, there was actually a hint of panic. I ignored him and turned to pour tea for Wu Xianhao. On the eve of the Qixi festival, colorful banners had already been hung across the streets of Taicang and at the Reich Tower. The aroma of shortbread drifted on the gentle breeze. Wu Xianhao had somehow heard of an old custom and happily dragged me along to catch spiders. He said that if you put the insects in a jar on the night of Qixi, then tomorrow morning, at dawn, whoever's spider spun the largest and roundest web would have their craftsmanship blessed by the deities. The 2 of us squatted by the flower bed in the back courtyard and searched through the grass for a long time, finally catching one each. His was quite large, pitch black, and looked very spirited. Mine was rather shriveled, curled up half dead at the bottom of the jar. Wu Xianhao held up his jar, looking at it from all angles, and lifted his chin proudly.
Just you wait. Tomorrow morning my web will definitely be bigger than yours.
I couldn't help but chuckle. Having endured 5 years in the Marquis's manor, no one had ever played this with me. The Qixi festival used to mean nothing more than doing extra embroidery work and copying the woman's virtues a few more times. Wu Shanhao had spoken to Xie Weiqing twice over the past few days. Seeing that he still had no intention of leaving, she simply stopped urging him. She was actually quite an easygoing person, taking things as they came. Every day, she dragged me all over the streets, munching on fresh lotus roots, picking out lanterns, watching street performances, and wandering through the markets. She looked more like a local than I did. The two of us sat side by side in the pavilion of the back courtyard, with a plate of pastries and 2 cups of green tea in front of us. As she munched on melon seeds, she suddenly turned her head to look at me, her tone carrying a slight sigh.
You. When I used to see you at the Marquis's manor, I always thought, you're still so young, so why are you so old-fashioned, walking so slowly, speaking so slowly, never showing your teeth when you smile, and being as rigid as an old woman? Just like my grandmother.
My hand holding the teacup paused slightly.
But then, on the Dragon Boat Festival, seeing you perform the lion dance and martial arts on the street really left me dumbfounded. I was wondering at the time, is this the real Cui Yu? The one before was like a finely carved wooden puppet. Yu, my mother once told me something. A girl can admire someone, and she can even pursue someone, but she must never lose her own soul.
I was stunned. Had I not lost myself for 5 whole years? After a moment of silence, I asked in a low voice, then what about the heir?
You mentioned Lord Xie.
Wu Shanhao laughed heartily and said,
I do admire him. He is handsome, aloof, and highly talented. Who wouldn't like him? But I wouldn't go so far as to change who I am for him. Being with the one you love means becoming better together and accepting each other. Today I yield to you. Tomorrow you yield to me. That is what sharing a life means. If only one person is always bowing down, doesn't that make them a servant?
For a moment, I didn't know what to say. She lived with such clarity, which surprised me a little. During those years in the Marquis's household, I only knew how to keep to my place, practice embroidery, and please him. I never imagined there could be another way to live. Even if you admire someone, you don't have to turn yourself into their shadow. Yes, so I no longer love him. The moment those words left my mouth, my heart suddenly felt a bit lighter, and I felt an inexplicable sense of relief. Wu Shanhao turned her face to look at me, a hint of understanding in her eyes.
Good for you. For finally seeing it clearly. My trip to Taicang this time actually has a purpose. I want to see if there are any master lion dancers here. I want to find a master, learn a couple of routines, and when my grandmother celebrates her birthday at the end of the year, I'll show the old lady what I can do. I'm sure she'll be grinning from ear to ear.
As she spoke, she even gestured a somersault, making me burst into laughter.
As for other things,
Wu Shanhao suddenly leaned in closer, her eyes curving into crescents, filled with a touch of mischievous joy.
I have a weakness for good looks. Whenever I see a handsome man, I take a liking to him.
He gestured with his chin toward the courtyard.
Your older brother, Shen Boyuan, is actually quite handsome. To me, he looks very pleasing to the eye.
Just as the words left his mouth, a cough drifted from behind us. We both turned around together. Without us realizing, Xie Weiqing and Shen Boyuan had been standing in a corner outside the pavilion. One had a gloomy expression, his jaw clenched tightly, as if he had suffered some painful blow. The other's face was completely flushed, standing there in a fluster, not knowing where to look. Wu Shanhao, however, was not flustered at all. She deliberately waved at them.
Oh, you heard everything?
She cheerfully added.
Then let me say it again. Young Master Shen, you are really handsome.
Shen Boyuan's earlobes grew so hot they seemed ready to bleed. On the Qixi festival, the night in Taicang was incredibly bustling. Both sides of the moat were hung with colorful lanterns, joining together into a brilliant Milky Way. Cheers and the sound of firecrackers mingled together, creating a lively clamor that rushed straight to one's chest. Wu Shanhao held my arm with his left hand, while his right hand carried a fox lantern he had just won in a lantern competition. His face was flushed with excitement. Shen Boyuan walked beside him, holding all the various small items he had won in his arms, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Xie Weiqing trailed at the very back, not saying a word. When I was happy, he was happy too. When I slowed down to admire the lanterns, he slowed down too. When I took a fancy to a revolving lantern, he reached into his pocket for money, but I had already paid for it myself, and slipped away carrying the lantern. His hand froze in midair, then slowly lowered back down. This kind of situation played out many times along the way. Wu Shanhao secretly whispered to me by my side.
Why is he acting like a tail?
I didn't reply, but kept walking forward with my lantern. The firecrackers were being set off at the stone bridge of the moat. When they exploded, the passers-by screamed in unison. Pushed by the crowd, I dizzily retreated to the stone pillar at the bridgehead, hoping to see further. I stepped onto a brick next to the stone carving, and stood on my tiptoes to look into the distance. I lost myself in the view, dazed, when suddenly my foot slipped, the brick tilted, and my body violently leaned backward. Before I could even cry for help, my entire body tumbled over the stone railing and fell into the river with a splash. I swallowed a huge gulp of water and struggled desperately. In the panic, I heard someone shouting on the bank. Someone fell into the river. Immediately after, there was another splash. Someone had jumped in. A pair of large hands grabbed my waist from behind and lifted me up with all their might. I was pulled to the bank. The people on the shore scrambled to haul me up. A long robe fell from above, wrapping around me. I looked up and recognized his face. The sharp, well-defined contours, the face weathered by the wind and sand of the north, and a pair of pitch black eyes staring at me with panic and heartbreak. I was stunned.
Ah, you.
He crouched down and used the long robe to wipe the mud off my face. His movements were rough yet gentle.
Why were you so careless?
When did you return home?
This morning.
He smiled, revealing two sharp canine teeth.
Just as I returned, it happened to be the Qixi festival. I thought I'd go out for a stroll, never expecting to see someone fall into the river the moment I hit the street. When I looked closer, it was you.
He was Lin Yusheng, the boy next door from the neighboring street. When we were young, he would often take me climbing trees to catch shrimp and flying kites. Later, his father went to the frontier, and his whole family moved away. Eventually, we lost touch completely. I stared at him blankly. Where did you go?
To the north. I've managed to become a military officer now. It is nothing special, but at least I can support everyone now.
He suddenly looked at me with a serious expression.
Ah, you. When you were little, you said, you preferred imposing military officers who could pull you out of trouble when you were in danger.
Lin Yusheng curled his lips into a smile.
Do you think I fit the bill?
My heart skipped a violent beat. He actually remembered the nonsense I used to babble. He hadn't forgotten the little girl with twin pigtails from years ago, who used to follow him around calling him Brother Lin. Yes, Lin Yusheng's eyes lit up in an instant. At that very moment, another firework burst in midair. The light illuminated the river's surface, and also illuminated the man still in the river. Unbeknownst to anyone, Xie Weiqing had also jumped into the water. He stared at us without moving, looking so foolish, as if he had lost some precious treasure. The light of the fireworks flickered on his face, casting shifting shadows. I tightened the coat around myself, looking at him without saying a word. The next morning, Xie Weiqing was finally leaving. The wounds on his back had not yet healed. He stood with a slight hunch after standing for a while, his face looking even paler than yesterday. Wu Xianhao had already climbed into the carriage ahead of him. She poked her head out to glance at him, then glanced at me, and tactfully closed the window curtain. I saw him out to the door. He stood there, staring at me for a long time before he finally spoke. His voice was already hoarse.
Ah, you. If I said that once I return to the capital, I will ask my parents for your hand, would I still have a chance?
I looked at him, without the slightest ripple in my heart. The past is like smoke, heir apparent. By taking that blade for me, you have fully repaid the debt of gratitude to my late father. Furthermore, upon my return home this time, the madam bestowed many treasures upon me. From this day forward, we owe each other nothing. His face turned pale for a moment. After a long pause, the corners of his lips tugged upward.
My mother actually saw through my heart before I did. I thought I was acting in your best interest. Your family background is modest. If you married me, how would you manage those social circles in the capital? Those noble ladies and young misses are more vicious than the last. I was afraid you would be looked down upon by malicious people. Afraid you would have your back stabbed by others. Afraid you wouldn't be able to hold your head up in public. So I set those rules for you. If one rule wasn't enough, I made it 2. If 2 weren't enough, I made it 10. I thought I was training you, but I was actually destroying you. Watching you suffer day after day, watching you become more and more introverted, watching you smile less and less. I thought you were improving, that you were changing into someone worthy of me. But I forgot. I fell for you in the first place because you were already wonderful. That was why I fell for you. Why did I try so hard to change the very person I was already in love with?
His eyes slowly grew red. He closed his eyes briefly, forcing down his tears, and let out a bitter laugh.
Mother said, if I wanted to win you back, I would have to tear off this pride of mine and trample it underfoot. But I have prided myself on being superior for too long, always thinking that if I just showed a little kindness, you would obediently come back to me, and that you would wipe away all my past misdeeds.
Xie Weiqing stared at me.
But only now do I understand that your heart was broken long ago. No matter how I try to mend it, I can never win you back.
The cries of street vendors selling dates drifted over, bringing with them the bustling scent of the mortal world. He stood there, amidst all the noise and prosperity, utterly alone. I lowered my eyes and curtsied to him. Safe travels, heir apparent. I turned around and walked back. As I stepped through the main gate, I heard the sound of the carriage departing behind me. growing further and further away. Under the doorframe, grandmother was holding a half basin of freshly cooked lamb offal noodles, waiting for me. It was steaming hot, and the fresh aroma assailed my nostrils.
You, eat it while it is hot.
I took the bowl, lowered my head, and took a sip of the broth. It was so delicious, my eyebrows almost fell off. The warmth slid all the way down my throat and into my stomach. Grandmother, this is delicious. She smiled and rubbed my head.
If it is delicious, eat more. I will cook it for you every day from now on.
I gave an in response. I lowered my head and ate that bowl of noodles, bite by bite. That warm, ordinary, everyday life, those tangible joys and sorrows, made my past years feel like a lifetime ago. Postscript by Xie Weiqing. Within 5 years, I ran to Taicang many times. Every time, I hid extremely far away, took just one glance, and turned to leave. She married someone. It was Lin Yusheng, the man who rescued her from the river on the Qixi festival. Later, he went to the northern frontier, won the war, and became a general. Others say General Lin is young and promising, but only I understood that his greatest achievement was making her happy. She had a daughter who looked just like her. During this year's Dragon Boat Festival, I spotted in the crowd that little kid putting on a show, learning the lion dance. After she finished, she ran back to her, looked up, and cried out,
"Mom, I want to eat lamb offal noodles."
She bent down, scratched her daughter's nose, and said with a smile, "All right." Lin Yusheng happened to return home just then. He hoisted their daughter onto his shoulders, and the family of 3 headed home together. The aroma of lamb offal noodles drifted from the street. Once upon a time, at the Marquis's dining table, I complained that this stuff smelled too gamey. She sat beside me, her spoon pausing for a beat. She didn't say a word. After that, the kitchen never prepared lamb offal again. I thought she was accommodating my preferences, and I felt quite pleased in my heart. He was a fast learner at everything, transforming himself from a lively oriole into a piece of lifeless, dead wood. I thought that was tempering, a shedding of her old self, and the path she had to take to be worthy of me. But I never expected. He never needed to pretend to be anything in the first place. It was I who was blind. 5 years ago, in her grandmother's courtyard, she had also ladled a bowl of mutton soup for me. I took a sip, and my entire body froze. It was savory, aromatic, and piping hot. The noodles were perfectly chewy, and the broth was as white as milk. It was the best thing I had ever tasted in my life. Yet, because of my own arrogance, I missed out on it. Not all mistakes can be made up for. Not all guests will wait for you in the same place. I understand it now, but my realization has come too late. The physician said I have, at most, 10 years left. What is 10 years enough for? Is it enough to accompany someone from dark hair to white? Is it enough to endure half a lifetime of hardships with someone? It is not. Since we cannot be together, then I will not drag him down. He deserves a whole and healthy man. A man who can grow old with him, rather than a sick invalid. Day would die, a sickly invalid, someone who could leave her behind at any moment, leaving him to live all alone in this world. Besides, he has long since stopped wanting me.